Greetings, campers, and welcome to part two of what is now going to be a three-part series on artistic legacy preparation, otherwise known as A Place to Leave Your Stuff. This is the latest edition in our TELUS webinar series. My name is Scott Walker. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Artists Network, formerly known as CSARN. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we live, work, and create on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land, now called Canada, since time immemorial. We acknowledge this as part of our covenant with all Indigenous nations to share, respect, and protect the land in the spirit of peace and friendship, and to honor the future generations of all our nations. Well, last week in part one of this webinar series, we talked about the legal aspect of artistic legacy preparation. If you missed it or would like to revisit some of the information, because there was an awful lot of it, the webinar is now posted on our website, which is csarn.ca. That's our former name. And just click on the webinar tab. Today, we're going to look at how to prepare the physical and digital aspects of our careers as creative artists. We know that questions will occur as you're listening to our two experts. So what we ask you to do is put them in the Q&A box. There are two boxes for communications. One is the Q&A box, the other is the chat box. By all means, use the chat box to comment back and forth. But for Q&A, because I'm the only one here running this, I can only look at one box at a time. So please put everything in the Q&A box. If a question is already there that's similar to what you want, please just upvote it. That's Zoom talk for, yes, I would like to know about that too. And please keep your questions as brief as possible. That way we'll be able to address the questions that matter to most of you in the time we have. We're going to start with our first presenter, an Edmonton-based artist. She has worked at the Provincial Archives of Alberta for 30 years. She's responsible for the historic photograph, film, and sound collections. Her art practice is informed by archival research and inspired by the stories of early prairie settler women as revealed through their archival diaries, letters, and photographs. Please welcome Marlena Wyman.
There we are. Okay, thanks. I will just get my PowerPoint here. There we are. All right, so just to let you know that I am actually retired from Provincial Archives of Alberta, but I have continued work in both archives and heritage research since then on a contract basis. And thanks, Scott, and hello, and thanks to everyone for joining us today, and to the Canadian Artists Network and Carfax for hosting this webinar. So what do I mean by artistic archiving? Basically, it's about what to keep from the records of your artistic life, how to care for those records, and how to donate them to an archival institution if you wish to do so. The documents from your life as an artist are important to keep, not only for yourself, but also for the public historical record. The life of an artist and the amount of work that goes into being an artist is largely misunderstood, as we know. It is important to document how we live our lives as artists, the highs and the lows, and it's also important to document the business and process of our artistic practice, along with the knowledge of techniques and materials, since most people only see the end product and don't understand all the levels of work that go into it before that. During my talk today, I will be assuming that you will be eventually donating your records to an institution. However, even if you or family members plan to keep your records at home, much of what I'm going to talk about will still apply on how to keep and care for your records yourself. So what is an archive? The main collecting mandate for archives is documentary material, which is determined by archivists to be of historical value. Archivists acquire records, appraise them for their historical value, arrange and describe them, ensure their preservation, and make them available to the public to view and use. What I'll be talking about today are the records of you as a private citizen and I will be providing examples of what that entails. But archives can also collect records of different levels of government, for example, and it can include things like vital statistics, legislation, court records. And also collected by archives are the records of businesses, organizations, cultural, and faith groups. And you'll hear me, excuse me, you'll hear me using some terms that tend to be used interchangeably by archivists. Material and records are the two most all-encompassing generic terms that can include all media and formats, such as paper records, photographs, sound recordings, films, and electronic records. But the terms documents and papers are also sometimes used to include whatever is archival. So archival technology, like other areas, has aspects of both precision and imprecision. Although I'm going to be talking specifically about archives in this webinar, archives, museums, libraries, special collections, galleries, and foundations can all have some overlapping in their collecting mandates. The main collecting mandate for museums is objects of historical value, whereas archives is documents. Libraries mainly collect published books and magazines along with other published material. And special collections are generally part of a library and can span the collecting mandates of both archivists and libraries. Often in smaller communities, archives, museums, and libraries are all housed and administered together. So some public and private galleries and foundations collect artworks and may also sometimes collect the archives of the artists who they represent in the gallery. So the vast majority of material in archival collections is available for anyone to research. Many finding aids and information about what any archival institution has in its collection are generally available through searchable online databases that are on each archive's website. Many archives also have a limited number of documents that are scanned and available to research online. And research can also take place in person at the archive. And a reference archivist assists researchers in locating the original material that can be viewed in the archive's public reading room. It is not allowed to leave the institution. Archives can be a valuable repository of primary source material for visual artists, writers, filmmakers, performers, musicians, podcasters, or any other creatives. And before including archival sources in your artworks, be sure to investigate any copyright and donor restrictions. And the reference archivist can guide you through that process. So I've spent a lot of time in archives. Excuse me. I worked at the Provincial Archives of Alberta as the archivist for photo, film, and sound collections for 30 years. And after I left, as I said, I have continued to do some contract work. And I also went back to the archives as a researcher using archival sources as inspiration for my artwork. And after I left, I created an exhibit at the Provincial Archives of Alberta that was based on some of my archival research there. And so some archives do also have spaces for exhibits. So what happens to our artworks? I'm talking about the records, but unfortunately, our physical artworks tend to be in a more precarious category with collecting institutions. Of course, some museums and galleries acquire artworks, and there are institutions such as the Alberta Foundation for the Arts that acquire artworks, but there are very few institutions that collect an artist's representational body of work. And those that do only collect the works tend to only collect the work of a few high-profile artists. So for archives, a few do collect specific types of artworks. For example, Library and Archives Canada acquire what they term documentary art. And that includes such artworks as commissioned portraits of officials and the artworks that Canadian war artists created when they were hired to document military activities during the First and Second World Wars. Now, although most archives do not acquire completed artworks, in some cases they may acquire studies and sketches. But overall, the lack of institutional collecting of a body of work from an artist's life is a big problematic gap. So here are some examples of what to keep from your artist's records, and there are a lot of things that archives are interested in. So it's your art business records, which include things like correspondence, contracts, submissions, both acceptances and rejections. And I know a lot of us have a bigger pile of rejections than acceptances. Awards, catalogs, exhibit posters, and other promotional material, educational material, articles, reviews and writings about you and by you, photographs of your artworks, exhibits, events in your studio spaces, financial records, and studio rental agreements. As well, archives are interested in your CVs, bios, artist statements, and art inventories, workshops that you taught or attended, residencies and retreats attended, volunteer work, and board positions. And notes, such as if you keep a notebook of inspiration and also to-do lists. It's interesting to see, not in just artists' lives, but everyone's lives, what our to-do lists comprise. Research material that you're doing for your artwork, diaries, journals, and sketchbooks. And in some cases, books and periodicals might also be relevant if they show evidence of your art life and your interests. And archives also collect film, video, and sound recordings of artists who are filmmakers, performing artists, and musicians. So with some records such as CVs, bios, artist statements, it's good to keep all versions of these over time since they change over the years. That means that when you're updating these types of records on your computer, keep old copies as well, rather than just overwriting them. So recently, CARPAC Alberta gave an excellent online workshop on how to keep an Excel spreadsheet for an art inventory. And you might be able to access this from your local CARPAC association. The type of inventory, whether Excel or on another platform, not only provides an excellent overall view of all your artworks over time, but it's also essential to keep track of your own art business in a day-to-day form. Inventories can include such information as title of artwork, year created, the description of it, the media, dimensions, framing, whether it's framed or not, storage location, whether at a gallery, whether in your studio or otherwise, exhibit information, whether any of those pieces were in an exhibit, the sales status, the date sold, price, and purchaser. Now, something to keep in mind is that in some cases, there can be income tax implications regarding artists' inventories. And that happens upon the disposition of an artist's archives and artworks, either by donation to an institution or by inheritance to heirs. And I'm no expert in this regard, but the Canadian Artists Network will be presenting a webinar in the future by a tax accountant who specializes in tax information for artists. But know in the meanwhile that there is a concern, and you can always slog your way through the CRA website or seek advice on your own for now. So archives are interested in your life as a whole, not only the artist aspects of it. Personal records provide context and a complete picture of who you are and how you lived your life. So these types of personal records include such things as personal correspondence, diaries and journals, photographs of yourself, your family and events, family trees and genealogy, other business, other work that you did, volunteer work, other kinds of writings, hobbies, photographs, home movies, and those can be on film, video, or in electronic format, and ephemera. And ephemera is basically things that are intended to be used once and thrown away. So ticket stubs of concerts you attended or postcards, those kind of things can sometimes be of interest. And some types of personal financial records are also important to keep. In order for researchers and historians to understand the lives of artists, it's important to include evidence of what are often the financial struggles of artists and the work that they often do in order to support their creative life. Also include a biography of yourself, both as an artist and otherwise, including your birth date, places lived, marriage, children, education, and other significant dates and events in your life. So the basic rule for preserving your archival records is that pretty much everything is bad for them. In spite of this, there are things that can be done to give them the best chance of long-term preservation. Light and fluctuations in temperature are the two biggest concerns that can be addressed simply by keeping materials in containers away from both sunlight and artificial UV light, and by storing them in an area where temperature remains constant and moderate. As artists know, artworks should not be located in direct sunlight, and the same thing goes for archival records. So in particular, darkness is a friend of archival records. Now, a lot of records that are stored at home end up in basements, and although it's not ideal, and if a few precautions are taken, finished basements can be fine for storage. Unfinished basements can be damp, and moisture can cause mold, especially in more humid areas of the country. So store your records in storage containers against an inside wall or against an insulated outside wall, just to keep temperature fluctuations to a minimum. And don't store them under any plumbing pipes or on the floor in case of flooding. And places like attics and unheated garages or storage sheds are not good places to store your records. Archival institutions use acid-free archival boxes and acid-free folders for long-term storage. And these counteract the natural acidity of paper and allow for air circulation and the off-gassing of some materials. Now, these can be purchased from some archival supply stores, but really for short-term storage, one of the simplest and best kinds of storage containers to use are plastic totes with lids. Those will keep your records dry and away from potential damage by water, insects, and rodents. So the most archival types of plastics are polyester, polyethylene, and polypropylene. The worst is polyvinyl chloride, also known as PVC, and vinyl. In fact, health-wise, environment-wise, PVC is one of the worst substances that exists, but that's another topic. Some plastic items do have recycling symbols and numbers on them, which tell you what type of plastic they are. So PVC is number 3, so avoid that number. Numbers 2, 4, and 5 are the best. And I don't think this is being done as much anymore, but for a while, lamination was very popular and it was thought to be, by some, of a way to preserve papers, but in fact it does the exact opposite. It causes damage and deterioration. Lamination seals the paper into plastic using heat, so it actually melts them together, and it's irreversible and non-archival. Copyright for artists was covered by Paul Bain in part 1 of this webinar, which will be on the Canadian Artists Network website. But I'm addressing some specific copyright concerns as they apply to archival situations. So archives often request that copyright be transferred to the archive at the time of donation. Public archives are intended to be used for research and for reuse. If copyright is not transferred, records can languish for decades without the possibility of use. And donors may say that they can be contacted regarding copyright use, but it's most often the case that archives are not informed of changes of address and contact information. Now, although immediate copyright transfer is preferred, an alternative is to identify an exact date when the copyright can be transferred. And do not specify that transfer can take place on the date of death, because archives are rarely informed of a donor's death, and they deal with such a large volume of records, it makes it pretty much impossible to track down a donor's death date. Moral rights are not transferred, and as much as they are able to, archives are concerned with the proper use of archival records so that their original intent is honored. And there will be material in your records for which you do not hold copyright, such as research. If you're able to, you just try to identify the author if possible, or the photographer. So in consultation with archivists, donors can also place other restrictions on access or use of their records. For example, a donor might request that a portion of the records be closed for a certain period of time if they include sensitive information, or that a specific credit line be used if any of these records are exhibited or published. And as with copyright, choose an end date for the lifting of the donor restrictions rather than a death date. In some cases, family members might wish to keep their records rather than donating them to an archive, and they might wish to have a child or a niece or a nephew or other family member keep their records after their death. However, at a certain point, there may be no family members who wish to keep them any longer. And unfortunately, when going through an estate, many people don't realize that these types of records can be donated to an archive. So something that you can do right away is just to place a note in each of your boxes of records stating something along the lines of, if no family member wishes to retain these documents, please contact, and then put in the name and contact information of the archive to offer them for donation. And regarding choosing an appropriate archive, if you're not sure where your records should go, you can contact any archival institution and explain what you wish to donate. If it's not within their collecting mandate, they'll recommend the correct archive for donation. Now, including these notices in each of your boxes of records means that there's one less concern for a family member at the emotional time of going through an estate, and valuable records will be saved from the dumpster. There are few things more heartbreaking to an archivist than to find out that a potential donor has thrown out photographs or documents that would have been considered valuable. You'd actually be surprised at what archivists decide to keep sometimes. It's not only the exceptional in life, but also the day-to-day aspects of our lives that archivists and historians are interested in. It's the job of an archivist to determine what to keep for historical evidence. So you don't need to worry about that. So there's no need to reorganize or tidy up the records or discard anything before bringing them into an archive. In fact, it is to be avoided. The way in which we keep our records reveals information about ourselves in all of our quirky, messy glory, or in more rare cases, our precise, orderly glory. Archivists bring what's called an intellectual order to records without physically reorganizing them, so that a researcher will have an easier time of locating what they want in the records. Keyword searches of archival lists and finding aids created by archive staff are what help researchers to locate what they're looking for. Now, having said that, when you're ready to take your boxes of records into an archive, number those boxes so as to maintain as close to the original order as possible. When I worked at the archives, there were people who dumped things into garbage bags and brought them in. And not only did that destroy the original order, it sometimes destroyed the records. And regarding reorganizing your records, or more to the point, not reorganizing them, the following is a cautionary tale. In Edmonton, author Ted Bishop's book, Riding with Rilke, Reflections on Motorcycles and Books, he visited a lot of archives and libraries, and he explains one of the differences between them. Bishop traveled to research Virginia Woolf's library at Washington State University in Pullman, but was greatly disappointed by his discovery, and I'll quote from his book. "Though special collections libraries were for me serene oases, they are in fact contested terrains, for they straddle the border between libraries and archives. Initially, the Woolf books had been housed together, but archivists and librarians order things differently. When a new curator, a librarian, took over, he shelved the Woolf books separately according to their subject call number, dispersing the collection among the rest of the library's books. That was his job. Yet for an archivist, the job would have been to keep the books together, to treat them as a text in themselves, even if possible, to keep them in the same order that they had been shelved in Woolf's house. In any case, what I wanted in Pullman no longer existed. What I wanted was to gain some sense of her personal library, which is not just a repository, it's a display, a performance. Virginia's notebooks let the end of one novel run into the notes for the next. It might include a book review starting from the back and written upside down on the blank leaves of a book, so that at a certain point, the two texts met topsy-turvy and going in opposite directions. What I had wanted to know was how she would have arranged her library, end of quote. So by dutifully following his training with the Dewey Decimal System, the librarian had destroyed a part of Virginia Woolf's life story and the integrity of her personal library. The original order had been lost. There are many types of archives: federal, provincial, municipal, university, corporate, etc., each of which have specific collecting mandates. Archivists can help you to decide which is the appropriate archive for your records. An important note to keep in mind is to donate everything to one archival institution only. Don't divide your records between more than one archival institution, or the context of the records will be lost. If you have moved in your life, all of your records should go to the archive in the area in which you lived most of your life. Also, don't split your records along thematic lines. For example, if you spent part of your career in the Army, do not donate those records to military archives and the rest to another archives, or again, the complete context of your life will be lost. So when you're ready to donate, contact an archive to set up a meeting with an archivist, and they will guide you through the process of donation. It will take some time before your donation of records can be processed and available to the public. The archivist will carry out a selection from the records that you donate, depending on what is considered to be of enduring historical value. You can either request that any unselected items be returned to you, or that the archive can dispose of them via secure archival methods. As I had mentioned when I was talking about artist inventories, in some cases there can be income tax implications, both positive and negative, regarding the donation of an artist's archive and artworks. In certain cases, some archival institutions are able to issue tax receipts for donations, which can be of benefit to an artist. However, last week in part 1 of the webinar, one of the artists posed an interesting question about capital gains implications upon the donation of an artist's archives, which I thought I would try to investigate further. But first, a disclaimer: this information is not meant to replace any advice from a lawyer or tax professional. I contacted the Canadian Council of Archives, who administer the National Archival Appraisal Board, aka NAB. When I was at the Provincial Archives of Alberta, I worked with NAB on the intake side, but not on the taxation side. So NAB appraises archival donations for certification by the Canadian Cultural Property Board of items that are considered to be of cultural value to Canadians. And this is where it becomes tricky. The phrase "considered to be" is up to some interpretation, just as the phrase "a substantial part of the work" is up to interpretation regarding copyright infringement. The opinion of the Canadian Council of Archives is that most donations of artists' records to archival institutions would not be subject to capital gains tax. However, capital gains generally does apply to donations of artworks or items similar to artworks, such as unpublished manuscripts. But if these donations are certified as cultural property, then there would be no tax payable by the artist for the donation. Not all archives meet the criteria to issue tax donations or cultural property certificates, and those that do have the right to determine whether either of those situations may apply. So always talk to an archivist again before donating. And as I had mentioned, the Canadian Artist Network will be presenting a webinar in the future by a tax accountant who specializes in tax information for artists, and hopefully they will be able to answer that question more definitively. I left the Provincial Archives of Alberta just as the preservation of electronic records was becoming a major issue for archives around the globe. Electronic records, also referred to as digital records, are a significant part of the record of your artistic life. They include such things as hard drives, flash drives, CDs, DVDs, or any other electronic medium, containing any of the archival materials that I had mentioned before. And it also includes online records such as emails, blogs, websites, and social media. So again, at the time that you're ready to donate, talk to an archivist about how to donate electronic records. As you know, there are new developments in technology pretty much daily. And for example, if you have any floppy disks in your collection, they are an obsolete format. Some archival institutions have the equipment to migrate those types of records to a current format, but it's better to do that sooner than later because both the formats and equipment all have limits on their viability. And an important piece of advice is to be sure to have at least one backup of any electronic record on something such as an external hard drive. And if you can keep that in a separate location from your computer, that's best. Like if you have a separate studio, that's a good location. So Leah will be talking in more detail about how to deal with your electronic and online life. And I hope that this, the information that I gave you now, will get you started on your artistic archiving journey. There will be questions after that I can hopefully answer after Leah's talk, but we'll have Leah speak first. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marlena. Great, absolutely fantastic. Lots of stuff to think about there, and we will continue to talk about that. And as you mentioned, we'll be talking or answering some questions later on. But first, as you mentioned, we're on to our second presentation. Our presenter is a poet, photo videographer, and digital artist based in Surrey, BC. Her first foray into the arts was a moonlighting gig on her local newspaper in her mid-20s, publishing images and words. She's a frequent published poet, author, photographer, videographer. Her 30-year career in information technology encouraged her to develop her digital imaging and sound skills, and today that augments her poetic and visual practices. She spends a lot of her time these days teaching artists and elders business and technology skills, and we're going to benefit from her wisdom right now. Leah Murray, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody, for coming to see us today. I'm going to be very visually boring compared to Marlena's lovely presentation. However, I hope I'm going to be able to give you some basic practical stuff and reassure you that the digital world is not quite as horrifically scary as it might look already for some of you. I'm going to dive into my presentation, which we're about ready to go here. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. And whoops, got the wrong thing in front of me. Here we go. Okay, so here's my presentation, and what we're going to focus on in here is just ensuring that you have a smooth transition from your hands into the hands of the folks in the future, what you need. This is very pragmatic stuff. So what we're, oh, hang on, there we go. I'm actually very honored to be asked to do this today. This is a subject that's close to my heart, having had to do it a number of times for various family members over the last few years. So what we're going to cover is the value and importance of the digital assets you have, what those digital assets are, what kinds of them they are, what metadata is, and what the kind of documentation you might need. We're going to talk about digital files and file archives, storage and backup strategies, online accounts and services, the legalities of some of this. And then if we have time, we're going to do a quick cover of digital financials and artificial intelligence, I'm not sure that all of you will be involved with those, or any of you will be involved with those. So we'll sort of see whether there's interest at that point in doing those. Also, I have made a handout package for you that includes a spreadsheet and includes, well, actually 2 spreadsheets, but it includes the slides and the information and the detailed information about some of this. So please try not to worry too much about keeping notes and whatnot. This is going to give you the general overview, and the nitty-gritty will be in the handout package that I'm supplying with this. Okay, so onward to the importance and value of your digital assets. Okay, given that the technology has expanded so much in the last 20 to 30 years and keeps expanding and changing, the technology keeps getting more active and more involved in supporting your art and in supporting your life in general. That's kind of revolutionized things and raised some issues and raised some opportunities, and allows us to share our work in a lot of new and innovative ways as well. There are unique challenges associated with the technology, and if we can actually deal with those challenges a little bit ahead of time, we'll solve a lot of problems for ourselves and particularly for our heirs and successors. Not to mention all the interested folks at the archives and historical places that Martha was talking about. If we manage our digital assets very well, we actually support the ongoing value of our legacies greatly, because digital assets are very easily accessible and transferable if you set them up correctly. You also do a huge favor to your heirs and successors, because the mountains of paperwork can be actually reduced to electrons a lot of the time, and your heirs and successors can find everything that they need to process your estate in your personal computer. The technology does continue to evolve, and that's been mentioned in terms of the form of things that you record. If you are recording information digitally for your archives, probably the very best thing you can do is actually use external hard drives that plug into your computer with a USB plug or whatever. It's very easy to use, for one thing, and for another, it actually seems to have a lot more longevity in terms of recovering the information than things like floppy drives, and then CDs, and then DVDs, and then memory sticks. All of those what I call lightweight storage materials tend to fade away with time, but the hard drive seems to have a little bit more eternity around it, so you can actually recover things a lot quicker from an external hard drive than you can from any of the other types. Also, external hard drives can be organized as if you were just using the regular part of your computer, and they can be backed up, and there's a lot of convenience to them. They're much cheaper than you might think when you consider it over the long term. For about $100 now, you can get 2 terabytes of data, which is absolutely huge and should be more than adequate to hold all of your digital files. So, practical steps and key points to address your digital archives, and a few tools to help with doing that. To start with, there are 3 kinds of digital assets to deal with. They're your digital files and file archives, which are scans or photographs of your artworks, exhibition materials, presentations that you've made, articles, and your press releases. All of those are very easily scannable into a PDF file from a very inexpensive little home office all-in-one printer that has a scanner and a printer and a USB port on it. And those can be had very inexpensively. So don't be shy about scanning stuff directly into PDF files, naming it appropriately and stashing it on your hard drive. That will help a lot with the organization that you have to do later. So make full use of that if you can. An all-in-one printer, I think, goes for about $150 for a really good one these days. So if you don't have one, ask somebody to give you one for Christmas, pretty much. Okay, so then you have online accounts and services, of which you have many, many more than you actually believe you do. And these online accounts and services are the kindest possible thing that you can document for your heirs and successors. And we'll get more into that in quite a bit more detail afterward. And then you have things like digital financial assets like blockchain records, Bitcoin cryptocurrency, and the evil non-fungible tokens. And I've also added a chunk about artificial intelligence assets to that as well. Okay, so every piece of information or every piece of digital file that you have has something associated with it called metadata. And metadata is the data about the data. So for a computer file, the metadata includes the file name, the file type, and the file format. It includes the location where it can be found on your computer or your backup drive. It includes the file size in kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes, or if you happen to be a movie maker, probably in terabytes as well. It includes the date that the digital file was created and when it was last modified. And so the big advantage to having electronic files is that a large chunk of the information that you need to record about it is actually embedded in the file. For some types of files, metadata may include other useful things like the copyright notice on the contents. As a photographer and videographer, my cameras actually record the date, and I can actually modify the settings on my devices to include my copyright notice in every image that I take in the metadata. It includes the type of camera, lens, and settings. So I don't have to actually include that in my notebooks or include that anywhere. It's embedded right with my image files. If I have digital rights management in operation on any of my pieces of digital art, that actually is included in the metadata as well. There are ways to get around the digital rights management keys, but they actually require some fairly hefty investment in recording studios and stuff like that. So most people will not bother to pirate your stuff and remove your metadata. So a lot of the time that travels right along with the file wherever it goes. Okay, metadata is embedded in the digital file, and you can actually see a good chunk of it by just looking at the file management tool on your computer. If you want to know more about how to use the file management tools on your computer, because that part of it is absolutely key to trying to do your digital stuff, I've put links here on this slide about how to work with files for Windows with your file manager and how to do your Mac file manager, file finder stuff. Knowing those two programs and knowing them well and using them effectively is probably the nicest thing you can do for yourself, because it will relieve you of a lot of administrivia if you know how to use those two very well. For even further information around metadata and digital asset management, you can go and use the Artist's Guide to Metadata. And that is for artists who have one computer or a computer and an iPad or a computer and a tablet. Okay, and if you need to have a great deal of professional advice in that area because you're undertaking a project like this, the Tate Museum in the UK actually has very good information in that, where there's a link here. Digital Asset Management, or DAM, and you knew this word would be in a talk about computers and administration, I'm sure, is actually the management of electronic files of whatever kind you have. That will give you, this little link will give you the overview of the best ways to do it. If you assist if you need an assist with digital asset management, there's a program out there called ACDC Pro that does a lovely job of capturing file information, searching for it through your computer, providing you with lists of it, and so on and so forth. That's not how they promote the software. They promote it as an entry-level image editing and whatnot, but it has a really robust digital asset manager with it. And there's a link there to that. And just general information about this, if you're really worried about the intellectual property and whatnot, the Committee on Intellectual Property Rights and Emerging Information Infrastructure has all the legalities and policy considerations, and it's fairly dense reading. You probably will not require any sleeping pill prescriptions you have for a week if you're trying to read your way through this. I didn't. So be warned, it's dense material, but it's there if you need it. Okay, so digital files, going back, are the scans or photographs of your artworks, exhibition materials, presentations, articles, and press releases. And they are archives of your work or exhibits on third-party platforms, things like ArtPal, Fine Art America, your own website. And they're also documented, your digital files and file archives. People need to know where they are and how to find them and how to connect with them. So they need your user ID and password for those platforms. And they also need to know what the assets are that are in those. 90% of the third-party platforms have easy ways of listing and identifying your works that are there. So you can actually just go to the platform and ask it to provide you a list, and it will give you everything you need to put into your spreadsheet for what's there and what it's been doing there. The online accounts and whatnot are the hardest part. So here's the step-by-step of how to get through this process. So the first thing you do is take a sheet of graph paper and make a rough list of the items you think belong in each category. That'll be the start of your inventory, and there's a sample list at on the worksheet that I've put together for this thing. And then you identify and organize those digital assets into specific categories. Then you initiate the process of preparing your digital assets for transition and start by conducting an offline inventory. What you have in physical is actually very valuable if it's already transformed into digital. And it makes your archive a lot more valuable and a lot easier to use for the archivists among you. So what you want to do is actually get photographs of your artwork, get videos of your presentations and stuff if you can, enlist the help you need to do that, and include those in your online inventory. Okay, so if you have an offline inventory of artworks like paintings, photographs, prints, whatever, then you need to actually document where all of those are. And I'm going to ask Carfax for their Excel spreadsheet for that, and I'll try and get them to agree to having it included in my package before I put it up there for Scott. So the offline should be pretty straightforward with their format. I tried to draft a format for it. I'm not happy with it, so I'm going to ask Carfax about theirs. You need to record your computer's folder structures and use File Explorer or your File Finder on the Mac for all of that. And online, you need all of the web addresses from your internet holding. Okay, so those will need to go into your spreadsheet or your listings. Now, lots of this is probably sounding very scary and very detail oriented, but there are ways to do it. Okay. Your file manager and your file finder will give you 80% of the information you want. Your computer will give you text listings of all of your documents and things if you have them organized in folders. And if you use the file listing app on your computer drives to make that easier, it will actually go find files of specific types and list them so you don't have to hunt through your computer forever and copy paste things. Again, that comes back to File Explorer for Windows and Finder for Macs. Those are the two biggies for you to actually learn how to use. If you know those two well, you can stop worrying about most of the rest of the technology stuff. So once you've identified your offline digital files, okay, and by offline, I mean digital files that are held on your external drive, okay, or held on a memory stick or some kind of media that might fade away with time. If you can get those all onto an external hard drive, then you're actually way ahead to the races, because you can actually use backup software to help you keep those up to date. Your digital files can be found, as I said, on things like your phone and your iPad as well. So don't forget to look at those and find out how to transfer that information onto your main computer. Once you've organized them, you found them all, you can actually document them. And if you use descriptive file names and descriptive folder structures that make sense to you, and hopefully to your potential custodians and beneficiaries, that will advance your record keeping a whole bunch. So next step is to go and make a list of your online accounts that you have, including the passwords for your computer. This is one of the biggest problem solvers for your heirs and successors and for your archivists. If they have a list like this, they can do an awful lot more for you and your estate than you would believe possible. So this one here is job one in terms of the digital digital files that you need to keep. Okay. When my dad passed away, I was lucky because he had everything very well organized all of it in a single file with all of these accesses listed for everything that I would need to do for my mother to establish her comfortably in his estate. This saved us months and months and months of time. I think altogether, pulling together all of the stuff that we had from him in Great Britain and in Canada and in the United States, because he lived in all those places in his life, settling all of that estate took us about 6 months because he had this thing. In contrast, when my ex-husband passed away, he had nothing. He didn't even have his computer password written down anywhere. And so we had to pay quite a bit of money to get his computer opened up so we could look at it. And we couldn't actually deal with 90% of the paperwork because he wasn't very organized about filing. He wasn't very organized about keeping stuff in his computer. He had wonderful information there because he had a long career in music, but we couldn't find most of it. So his estate went relatively impoverished by comparison to my dad's. And a lot of the stuff that he did during his lifetime musically never got recorded or never got carried forward simply because we could not find it. It took us about 3 years actually to sort out his estate by comparison to the 6 months, just because my dad had a list of files. When you make that list of your accounts and whatnot, make sure that you keep it password protected. You can password protect anything as simply as an Excel spreadsheet. And as long as you don't store it online anywhere, it's adequate security on your personal computer. You can actually keep that up to date fairly easily. I leave mine sitting open on my desk if I'm at the computer. And if I have to change a password, I record the change as soon as I've done that. You can use a password wallet. Okay, I have a couple of them. I'm not wild about them because they're not as convenient or as intuitive to use as my spreadsheet. And they're more of a hassle to keep updated because they're yet another piece of software that I have to learn. And I'm not averse to learning software, but I have enough other stuff on my mind that learning software doesn't come as easily as it used to. So I very rarely will venture out to do learn new software unless I have a compelling reason to do so. What's tried and true for you will work best for you as long as it's not obsolete and not a major security risk. Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at with that is keep it simple. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be technological. It doesn't have to be expensive. It has to be securable and it has to be pragmatic. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of spreadsheets examples of an accounts listing and an inventory list. Okay. All right, so here I just have an Excel spreadsheet, and this particular list is the online accounts inventory. And what I did with this, I've used this one for about the last 20 years. I just put an account type code down the left-hand side so that I know what I'm dealing with and how I can easily flip through to find things. Okay. I use, I name the account supplier. Okay, so for instance, for my banking, my personal bank, my payment processing applications, any credit cards I have. Okay, I put the login URL for those accounts, the internet address for them, I put my user ID. Okay, my password, my account or contract ID or client ID, because that's important. If you have to talk to them or if somebody has to phone them, you need that information right at your fingertips when you have to call them. And especially if you're trying to sort out an estate, you need the exact accounts and things to make life go a lot smoother for you and the people that are trying to help you. The account name on the profile. Okay, and this actually may be different than your email address that you use to log in with. Okay, for example, my Square card, okay, it has my user ID as my email address, okay, but the account name is my company name. You need to know that for some of these suppliers. I also try to record the customer service contact, the phone number and the URL if I have them for some of these, so that that's all right at their fingertips and it's very easy for people to find, particularly your heirs and whatnot. Okay. Categories that I worry about for this are my banking information, my tax information, my healthcare information, email addresses that I have, social media accounts that I have, everything to do with my website, insurance accounts that I have, software that I own that I have licenses for, hardware that I own that I have licenses for, or that might be insured or under warranty, tools that I use in my arts practice, and any materials that I might use, where I get them and who I get them from and how I contact those people. Okay, and supplier accounts other than the stuff I use for my arts practice. Okay, so this is like my Hydro, my Amazon Prime account, because I'm forever getting those people to ship me things, so I don't have to pay for the shipping. The Canadian ISBN service system, so I can register my art books and whatnot with an ISBN number. The Nissan dealership for my truck. Photographers Direct, Staples, TELUS high-speed internet, all that stuff. Okay, so your mileage is going to vary in terms of who goes into these categories, but these are the basic categories of digital accounts that you actually will need to keep and the information you need to put into them. Your heirs and successors will bless you and thank you for eternity if they have a list like this that they can use. Inventories in real life. Okay, I'm not thrilled with this inventory that I have here. I have my own setup sort of like this. I actually include in it things like the type of asset I have, whether it's a digital recording, a performance, a speech or podcast, what digital arts services I offer, literary assets, photojournalism that I've done, scripts or screenplays that I've done, just general text information. Product assets, I put my artwork on clothing and accessories, so I include that. Visual assets, okay. And I also have offline physical assets that I make a list of, and this one I'm really not thrilled with. So as I said, I'm going to ask Carfax for for theirs and see if I can improve this. If I do that, I will give it to Scott to update our archive with it. The last thing I do is I record whether or not I have an NFT, a non-fungible token for that particular piece of art, and whether or not I have an intellectual property interest in it. Here I've just marked that yes, I have intellectual property on that particular item, and it's the copyright. This one I have no intellectual property interest in it because it was a work for hire. This one is a shared intellectual property arrangement. I own the design of the artwork that goes on the clothing and accessories, and they own the design of the clothing and accessories. Okay, so and that's pretty much what happens there. And again, I keep that same information for any of the physical assets that I have, along with the stuff that Martha was mentioning, or Marlena was mentioning earlier. Okay, so I'll ask for the Carfax one, and perhaps we can do a comparison and see if that's worthwhile. Okay, so references for digital files and file archives. I've got them all here. There are best practices for file naming and the password keeper apps. Okay, for all the different kinds of devices that you might have. And again, those will be in the handouts that I give you. Legalities. Things that you need to keep in the back of your mind for legalities are what are your copyright and intellectual property holdings. Okay, the dates matter. What is out for exhibit sale and where is it? And where's the copy of the contract? Do you have any residuals coming in, and where's the paperwork for them? If it's in a digital file or a set of emails or something, you need folders in both your email and your filing system to hold those. And what I do is I just name the folder for holding the detailed information on my computer hard drive, and then I just make a folder under my inbox with the same name so that I actually can file emails related to it instantly, and I don't have to think about it. They're exactly the same file, and I know the filing system because it's my filing system. Your power of attorney, etc. Does it say who can speak for you in the event of your death or disability regarding your body of work and digital holdings? If you're doing that kind of paperwork, make sure that you get your lawyer to address this issue, okay? Because they didn't used to actually worry about it too much. And so you might actually need to have a separate power of attorney for that kind of stuff or whatever. And if you can name a technical contact person for your major online accounts to help with shutting them down and transferring them, a lot of digital service providers will ask you, do you have a technical contact? Or they will not ask you, and you will simply find a space for it in your account settings with them. So look for that. And if you have the opportunity to name a technical contact who can help your heirs and successors do that, or who is one of your heirs and successors, then save yourself and them a lot of grief by naming them right on the account. Storage and backup strategies. There are only 3 ways to save your sanity, and they're all named backup. Okay, use an automated incremental mode of backup. Probably the least expensive and most effective way you can do this is to just go over to Staples or London Drugs or wherever and buy yourself an external hard drive that has automatic backup software included in it. tell it to do daily or weekly backup. I prefer daily, but I'm a little bit fussy about that sort of stuff. So tell it to do the automated backup around 2 o'clock in the morning when you're busy doing other stuff, unless you're a night owl like me and you're working at 2 in the morning. And tell it to use incremental mode, because if you tell it to use full backup, it will fill up your external hard drive completely instead of just updating folders with new files and updating existing files with the changed information in them. Okay, so if you use incremental mode, it seems a little counterintuitive, but it actually will save you a lot of hard drive space, and it will save you a lot of grief afterward for rapidly changing files that need to stay up to date. I have my spreadsheets for my inventory and my online accounts and whatnot, all in the incremental one, because almost every day I am changing something to do with my arts inventory, taking stuff from one exhibit location to another exhibit location, one gallery to another gallery, you know, and I just actually make the change in my spreadsheet that day when I do whatever it is. Last thing I do before I leave my office at night is shift inventory if I've moved it. And then it just gets backed up at, you know, for me, 3 in the morning. Hey, external drives are really cheap compared to your Genius Kids time and sanity. Okay, and if you learn nothing more about your computer ever, that's okay, as long as you learn to use your File Explorer or your File Finder app really well. Don't be shy about trading artwork or lessons for secretarial or technical help if you have to. Barter is alive and well among seniors and solopreneurs, and lots of technical people would love to know more about the arts now that they're getting older and can't really afford to actually go and take lessons. So don't be afraid of offering a barter in return. I know that's probably not popular with professional artists, but it is a great boon to artists in general to be willing to barter. Okay, so now we're getting into the weird stuff, which is the digital financial assets. And I'm going to stop here and ask if anybody wants to go through this, or if you just want to read that. If you would be so kind as to put it in the chat, or in the chat, or whatever, I will be happy to go and record the majority here quickly, and we'll see if okay.
It looks
I'm
like one
getting it.
person is interested.
Yep. Okay. I wasn't sure, so I included it, but I've left the information in my package. Okay, so it's there if you want to read it, and we'll just skip right over all that stuff. Okay, it's got all that detail with further info. Artificial intelligence, same question. Does anybody want to discuss that or know about it?
Actually, if I can jump in again, Leah, we are going to be doing a social media for experts presentation in about 2.5 weeks, and we will be talking about AI at that point. So why don't we leave it for then?
All right. AI is not actually social media, but okay.
No, but he's going to include that.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So that information is there. Does anybody have questions they want to throw into the Q&A? Let me just take a look here.
Let me ask you, Leah, to unshare your screen.
Yep.
We do have a bunch of questions for both you and Marlena. So Marlena, if you'd like to join us again. There you are. The first question, I think this is probably for you, Marlena, is how do you go about choosing an archive that would accept a donation of your records? And Leah, this may be for you as well.
Yeah, that is a difficult thing to decide. So archive institutions tend to be not competitive, so that if you contact any institution, and usually the bigger ones will be more helpful, Library and Archives Canada or the provincial archives in your province, you just tell them what you have and they will recommend which is the best archive.
And kind of a follow-up here, would archives only be interested in artists who have a national or international reputation?
No, they're interested in pretty much any artist's records. That is one of the issues, though, with donating artworks, and that's why it's limited with museums and galleries, just because of storage space and the costs involved. Whereas archives have the ability to be a bit more democratic that way in their acquisitions, because they don't have as much of a storage space issue. And the archives are definitely not only interested in what would be considered to be those higher level artists. I don't even know how you would really make that decision, you know, so definitely interested in any artist's work. And they do have the decision-making ability to say yes or no, but always good to contact first.
Good. Okay. How about, you were talking about including financial records in your archives. Would that include tax returns?
Yeah, that's a bit iffy because that can include sensitive personal information.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be more to do, unless that personal information can be redacted. But otherwise, it would be more to do with your day-to-day finances, maybe the information that you provide your accountant if you have an accountant. So what your expenses are, both in your daily life as well as with your artwork, supplies and so forth. So if you keep, like Leah had some really good examples of Excel spreadsheets, if you keep that type of a spreadsheet for your personal financial situation, then that would be a better thing. It just gives more of an overview of incoming and outgoing finances for an artist.
Yep.
Leah, anything to add on to that at this point?
Well, for the financial information, I tend to believe that income tax returns and stuff like that's very detailed of that sort, but you know, personal budgets and things, I tend to believe that those aren't really anybody else's business and don't need to be the archive. So the reason I put all my accounts down in the list is so they know who I got my supplies from. And if they want to know how costly it was to develop my particular art form, they can go ask the supplier.
Yeah.
The suppliers keep historical records too. So
yeah, but if you do keep your own inventory of that kind of thing, it can be helpful just to have it all in one place.
Yep, it can be. And you know, like for me, my my dad's income tax returns would be of no real interest to anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. But the fact that he made his living in the ways that he did was of interest. So, you know, I've recorded his employers and his qualifications and, you know, professional awards and things like that. And when they were monetary awards, that was noted as well. But for fine detail, no, I don't give away personal fine detail much.
Yeah, I agree.
A writer asks, I've always understood that I should retain 2 copies of all publications, posters, promotions to deposit with an archival repository. Is that correct?
No, archives will only keep 1 copy. Even with archives, they have limited space. I mean, if you, what Leah was talking about, and me as well, with doing backup of your online and your other electronic records, that's a good thing to do, but archives don't require that. Yeah, they have their own systems of backup for electronic records, and for paper records and film, photos, those kind of things, they only keep 1 copy.
Okay. What about websites after you're gone? I see.
Website.
Okay, Leah,
Oh,
over to
yes.
you. And social media.
Yeah.
What do you do about those?
Okay, so those have a wrinkle in them, in that the technology for supporting them changes at about every 6 months. Okay, so what is happening is that information that's on your website and on your social media platform is not actually backed up for longer than a month by the people that provide you with the platform. And if you don't make a backup of your website that provides a snapshot, you will not have copies of it that could be recorded, even though the technology has changed. So what I do with those is I actually take a complete backup at the file level of my website once a year at between Christmas and New Year's. And I put that into my backup archive. And it's just a snapshot. It's that once a year, your website is not going to outlast you beyond about 6 months after you pass away. It's going to get shut down. Okay, so what you need to do is have a relatively recent backup of the website at the file level. So that means that you actually have a little routine that goes in and takes copies of the files that are on your website, stashes them in a folder, in one folder with subfolders, and you put that into your backup drive. Okay, that way everything that was on your website can be easily recovered, whether the website technology that displayed it is available or not. Okay, and you don't need it for more than once a year. What's going to happen is that your heirs and successors are going to shut that down 6 or 10 months after you pass away, because it's no longer of any use to you. Your assets for your artwork and whatnot will be either in an archive or will be being dispersed through auctions and whatnot. And your heirs and successors will set up those accounts and manage them using your system. Okay. Your social media accounts, the same thing applies, except that you cannot take a backup of those. Whatever you put on social media, if you use images of your work or images of things that you're doing there, you already created those images and stored them on your home device, on your computer. Okay. If you want to record a conversation that you've had with somebody on social media because you think that there's some value in recording that particular discussion, then do a text copy of it and paste it into a text document and stuff it in your archives. I have on my computer my text document file open all the time with a file called Scratchpad on it. And when I run across those things where I think I've said something particularly pithy or gifted or valuable, I copy the conversation just using copy and paste it in there, and leave it for posterity in a text file.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. And this may be for you, Marlena. Would it be better to transfer copyrights and dedicated funds to administrate all of this to a, quote, company of my family and heirs while I'm still alive?
Well,
or is that maybe for the tax accountant?
I was just going to say, I don't know, but I think that, yeah, I'm hoping that those kind of questions can be answered by the tax accountant. And just to add to the last question, though, there is an interesting online website called Internet Archive that has all kinds of amazing stuff, including copyright-free movies and images and everything. They also on that have something called the Wayback Machine that does actually capture websites, not everything, but you can always check in there just to see if your website has been captured. I don't know how they do it. It's some kind of robot crawl thing, but it is a pretty amazing project that they've undertaken. So that's the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive. Not to be necessarily trusted is the only way to do it, but it is worth looking at.
All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for now. I thank you both very much for your expertise, sharing it with us today. It has been most illuminating. And on behalf of everybody here today, thank you so much. Marlena Wyman and Leah Murray, thank you both. I'd like to say also thank you to our series sponsor, TELUS, who've made this very possible. Last weekend, as we've mentioned a couple of times, it became clear that we need a third look at this topic. So we are in the process of working on a third chapter with a financial expert who can guide us through the tax implications of our artwork. And as I also mentioned, we're presenting an advanced look at social media, which will also include artificial intelligence information. Social Media 301 with Boyd Neal will be presented on Monday, June 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. You can register for that on our website, which is still csarn.ca. And you'll be able to find video recording of this presentation and last week's as well. Before we go, thanks to Patrick Close for his advice on framing the topics of today's webinar and last week's. Thank you also to AFBS, CARFAC, the Canadian Federation of Musicians, Dance Collection DAOS, the Directors Guild of Canada, PAL Ottawa, the Unison Benevolent Fund, and everybody else who helped spread the word. Most of all, thank you to you for being here. Otherwise, without you, this all would have been pointless. So take care, be well, have a creative day, and we will talk again.